It says it's like a little whirling. It looks like it's trying to publish. Hey everybody, sorry for being a few minutes late. I was actually here talking to myself for about 6 minutes because this silly Mevo that we use for streaming requires that you press the publish button twice. So my apologies for that. We were theoretically live and on time, so I will try and go back and recover what we have covered already. So let's talk about what's coming up over the next few weeks here. We are definitely behind in videos, and I apologize for that. I ended up calling what my doctor called not quite pneumonia in the New York Auto Show, so I'm just recovering from that. I've been on antibiotics for a few weeks here, but everything seems to be better now. So upcoming cars, be sure and stay tuned. In June, we will be driving the Explorer and the Palisade at those launch events, and those videos will be out just as soon as the embargo lifts on those, so expect those both in the middle of the month. We also have a bunch of cars coming up here that are in that we actually have already filmed, but the videos have not been completely edited. We have the Volkswagen Jetta, that'd be the base 1.4 liter engine, the Niro EV, a video between the Niro, the Leaf Plus, and the Tesla base model, BMW X5, Kia Soul, a video between the Ram Rebel and the Ram Power Wagon, the Mercedes-Benz G550, the Toyota Tundra, Pacifica Hybrid, Hyundai Veloster N, a Honda Passport, Volkswagen Golf SE, and the Mercedes-Benz A220. I noticed that someone was asking about the Mercedes-Benz A-Class in the comment section already, so we will be driving that vehicle in about a week or so. So expect that video. We're getting pretty behind here. Expect that video sometime in June. We will be releasing about 4 videos a week here, hopefully, starting next week. So stay tuned for that. There'll be a barrage of them all. Next thing I wanted to cover was EV range, because we've received a number of questions about how we test EV range and EV efficiency here at Alex and Autos. It's actually a pretty straightforward test. So I have a drive route right here. I printed this out. You can barely see it here on camera. It is 60 miles long. So we start at our super secret location here in San Jose. We drive down 101 all the way to Morgan Hill. If you're familiar with Bay Area geography, there is a little bit of an incline there, but we then cancel that out by going backwards in roughly the same direction. We then turn around in Morgan Hill, scoot through Almaden on some rural roads there, and then hop onto an expressway, which has a speed limit of 45 to 50 miles an hour. We then tool along occasional stoplights, but generally speaking, those more moderate speeds. These are generally very advantageous for EV efficiency, I should say, these particular speeds. And then we wrap it up with a little bit more of a freeway loop right up there, kicking it on into 60.5 miles for that loop. We then repeat the loop over and over and over again until we get really close to 90% of overall battery state of charge. We then just do some loops around the neighborhood here near my office. Once we actually hit 10%, we plug it into the EVSE. It logs how much power we've actually stuffed in the battery. That verifies that we have actually consumed 90% of the battery. We've put that power in. We then check how many miles we went. That gives us our miles per kilowatt hour number, and then we multiply that by the full capacity of the battery, giving us the actual range figure. You will be seeing this chart in an upcoming comparison review very shortly on the Leaf Plus, the Niro, and the short-range Model 3. The key thing here is that a lot of EVs used to be pretty optimistic in terms of overall range figures, and now I can safely say that the only 2 EVs that we've tested here recently that are optimistic in their range numbers are the Model 3 and the Chevy Bolt, actually. The Jaguar I-Pace was pretty optimistic too, but not quite as optimistic, shall we say, as the Model 3. The Model 3, in our scoring, has a real-world range of about 60 miles lower than advertised. So 240 miles is what Tesla says it should get. In our real-world testing, 190 is about what you should expect in that model. Interestingly enough, the Chevy Bolt has a very similar drop, not quite as large, but 238 is what they claim. 198 is what your real-world mileage should be, according to our testing. Meanwhile, the Niro was pretty much even with its number, 240 miles of actual real-world range, and the Kona just a hair below at 254. Now, it is worth noting that if you're in a colder climate, the Niro, thanks to its heat pump system, is going to be better in terms of overall range loss. The main reason for that is that heat pumps are more than 100% efficient, so they're not using nearly as much power to create the same amount of heat. So with all of that out of the way, let us move on to your questions. We will dive right on in here. And if anybody is interested, of course, you can feel free to click those super chat buttons down there and send us cash. That helps keep these live shows working. I do have my video editor here working hard, and she's going to be reaching into overtime status here soon. So we have to make sure and keep her in her Honda HR-V. Let's see here. What's the best car to learn how to drive a stick in? The Honda Civic, Toyota Corolla, or Hyundai Elantra? I would say I like the way the Honda Civic's manual transmission feels, generally speaking. It's just a good all-around manual transmission. I do like it a little bit better than the Corolla's manual or the Hyundai Elantra manual transmission. And the Honda Civic, if you're interested in getting a car with a manual, you can get that manual transmission in the sport trim. The Elantra, you could get it in the sport trim, but we just heard 30 minutes ago that Hyundai is actually canceling the manual transmission in the Elantra Sport, which was kind of a surprising move there. So that would be my recommendation. When are we getting the Rav4 Hybrid? That is a really good question. We don't know yet. We should have a Rav4 Adventure and a Rav4 Hybrid, probably a Rav4 Limited here for reviews coming up in the next month or so. And then we've actually ordered our own Rav4 Hybrid to do a long-term review here at Alex Autos. We're told to expect that in 2 to 3 months. So our guess is that it could be sometime in late June, but we are not entirely sure. One thing we do know, however, is that we have to get rid of the Model 3 in order to be able to afford the new Rav4 Hybrid. So if you are interested in buying a standard range Model 3, if you want the one that we have been driving around in, then feel free, let us know if you are interested at all. We haven't figured out exactly what the selling price on that will be because we have no idea really what it's worth. But it will probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of around $38,000, which is what we paid for the model. It does appear, since it is a standard range plus, that its real world value should be somewhere around that $38,000, $39,000 range, somewhere in there. We did upgrade our standard range Model 3 to autopilot, so we ended up paying $36,500 plus the autopilot upgrade, so they will be selling it at a little bit of a loss, but we'll see how that goes. Moving along here. Are we going to do a full review of the 2019 Toyota Avalon? We might, if there is a lot of interest on that. So if a lot of you are interested in that, you can go over to alexautos.com, submit a request for a review. We'll see how many of you are really interested in the Avalon. The Avalon does not sell hugely well in the US, so I'm not sure whether or not that will be high on our priority list. We'll see here. What do we think of the Mercedes-Benz A-Class? I've always liked Mercedes small vehicles. I'll hold out our full opinions until we can actually get one in here. We should have it on Monday of next week. So if you don't follow us over at facebook.com/AlexAutos, you can head over there and you'll be able to find out our thoughts immediately. Let's see here. Should I get a Civic Si Coupe or an Elantra GT N-Line? Ooh, a Coupe or a hatchback? That's a tricky question. I would say why not split the difference and get a Civic Si sedan? That seems a little bit more practical, but let me know. Let's see here. Why don't many gasoline cars have single-speed transmissions like electric cars? It would just be efficiency there. So a single-speed transmission would... Hold on, pardon me here. My computer all of a sudden decided that it wants an update. Single-speed transmission in an automatic car, they actually have tried to do this in the past. So if you recall... much older vehicles out there at the very early dawn of automatic transmissions, there was basically just a gear set, a torque converter, and that was all you got. Performance was terrible. Fuel economy was terrible. That's why we have multi-speed automatic transmissions in a nutshell. Let's see here. Toyota Avalon question again. I think we already covered that. Let's see here. When will we have our hands on the all-new Palisade? We'll be driving that about the 3rd week of June, so be sure and stay tuned for that. Mazda 3 sedan or hatch, which is more reliable? They should be pretty much equal there. I don't see any difference in reliability between those two models, quite logically, because they're made in the same factory, they use all the same parts, etc. Let me know which one you're thinking about down there in the comment section below. See here, Volkswagen Arteon or Kia Stinger. I would Stinger, rear-wheel drive, optional twin-turbo V6. The Arteon is a little on the pricey side. I do like the way it looks, and I like the interior, but I have to say that for the bang for the buck is much better in the Stinger. And the Stinger's overall driving abilities are going to be different, and I would say more to my preference than what we find in the Volkswagen. What do we think about the new Ram heavy-duty pickup trucks? That's an interesting question. I like them, but at the same time, I'm disappointed a little bit in what Ram chose to do with the heavy-duty trucks. So instead of giving it a complete redesign like Ram did with the 1500 series half-ton trucks, with the 2500 and 3500, it was a very significant refresh, but not a complete redesign. So we get the new look up front on the grille, we get some tweaked tail lamps, we get the new interior out of the 1500. They lifted it, tweaked it a little bit, and managed to jam it into the same slot in the cab. We also get the new safety systems from the Ram 1500, which are a pretty big deal. We get some updated headlamps. We get the new 8-speed automatic transmission with the 6.4-liter Hemi. And then we get the updated Cummins turbo diesel, which gives us incredible towing ability. But the cab itself is largely a carryover. So the seats, the seat frames in the front and in the back, and even the doors are the same as the previous generation model. So this leads to a slightly less comfortable and slightly discordant interior. So the door panels are different than the Ram 1500, and they don't match the dashboard quite as well. The big thing is that the seat frames and the seats themselves are not as comfortable as the newer seat design in the Ram 1500. Most of those 2500 models, you'll notice, if they have lumbar support, it's a two-way lumbar support, not a four-way lumbar support like we find in the Ram 1500. And the overall floor stamping is also different than the 1500, so there's a much larger driveline hump than we find in the Super Duty trucks or in the Silverado 2500, 3500. And that's going to be really obvious to your front passenger. It's going to be a little bit less comfortable there. The cab is also a tiny bit smaller, so the passengers in the back don't have quite as much legroom as they have in the smaller pickup truck. Pardon me. Now that said, the Ram truck does excel when it comes to overall towing. So 36,000 pounds or so of towing ability, which is massive. We have the Cummins turbo diesel. I really like the combination of the 6.4-liter V8 and the 8-speed automatic transmission. So a little bit of highs and lows going on there. I think it's still very, very competitive with the Silverado 2500 and 3500, especially when it comes to gadgets. We don't have radar adaptive cruise control in the Silverado trucks for some reason in their heavy-duty models. Unfortunately, I understand there is a Silverado HD drive at some point here this week, next week, and we have not been invited to that one. Generally speaking, for some reason within the General Motors envelope, I get invited to drive GMCs, but not the Chevys. Don't know why that is. So expect a review on that whenever GMC does their launch event for the closely related Sierra. So that's about it. Let's move along. What do we think of the Volvo S60 T6R design? I've always had a soft spot for the S60. I like the way that Volvo is not trying to make a front-wheel drive BMW 3 Series. They're thinking a little bit outside the box. They're going in a slightly different direction. It's very comfortable inside and outside, and I like the overall look. I think it's a good value overall. It's not going to be as sporty as the BMW, but I think it's going to be overall a pretty good vehicle. Let's see here. Someone is asking about a specific engine. I'm assuming you're talking about the Mitsubishi engine. I don't have too much direct experience with that engine. It is related to the Hyundai and Chrysler engines. It's part of that World engine family that was co-designed. But if you have any specific questions, let me know exactly what you're asking about down there. Someone's having a question about the Rav4 Hybrid. Let's see, currently have a last generation hybrid. Want to know your thoughts on the new design and the ride of the Rav4 Hybrid. Generally speaking, the new design is better in just about every way versus the last generation Rav4. Fuel economy is definitely up in this generation, 40 miles per gallon combined. I also like the look a lot better versus the last generation Rav4. It's also a little bit more off-road focused. We definitely have more ground clearance in the new Rav4 than in the last generation model. Specifically about the ride, I would have to think on that and probably drive them back to back. The Rav4 was never a standout in any particular way. It was very average, so I don't think it had the best ride. I don't think it had the worst ride in that segment. And my impression the last time I was in the Rav4, which admittedly has been 6 months now, was that it was right there in the middle of the pack as well. One thing that a lot of folks have complained about in the new generation Rav4 was overall cabin noise. They thought that it was a little bit too high. I have to say, after having driven those models back in December and recently driven the RAV4 Adventure again, I didn't really find the cabin noise to be too out of the norm for that segment. You find very similar noise in the Sorento, the Sportage, the Tucson, etc. The last time we had the Ford Escape, it was quite similar. Now, clearly we don't know what the new Escape is going to be like, but hopefully we'll be driving it soon. Let's see here. Your comment read, the Cayman being rear engine while discussing the Supra is curious. Care to elaborate? The Cayman is technically... Porsche would like to say it's a mid-engine vehicle, and I suppose that's technically true in that there is a cargo area behind the engine, but depending on mid-engine, rear-engine, the line is a little fuzzy, to be perfectly honest, in a lot of vehicles, because some will have a small cargo area behind the engine, some may not, and still call themselves a mid-engine. Some points here would be things like the McLarens. They claim they're mid-engine, but there's nothing behind the engine, so is it really a mid-engine? In my head, a mid-engine, the engine should really be in the middle of the wheelbase, and that's not necessarily where they're always located, so that's my thought there. The big thing about the Cayman having the engine behind the driver is that it shifts the weight to the rear of the vehicle, and that's the prime difference between most of these so-called mid-engine vehicles, rear-engine vehicles, and front-engine vehicles, is that they move the weight to the rear. So most vehicles in America will have a front heavyweight bias, so more than 50% of the weight is on the front axle. Vehicles like the Cayman, the 911, the Alfa Romeo 4C, even some entries that have their engine up front, like the Mercedes-Benz GT series, they actually have a rear weight bias, more of the weight on the rear axle than on the front. There are a number of reasons that you might want a rear weight bias, but they mainly have to do with performance and performance driving. So putting the weight on the back is going to make turn in a little bit easier. It's going to shift the weight to the wheels that have the most traction in the back, and it's going to give you a different driving feel overall. Now, the downside for most shoppers is that different driving feel can also lead to some unpredictable driving dynamics. So an interesting way to look at this is a Skip Barber driving instructor that I know made this point that when a Porsche is in a turn, the dynamics going on are that the engine wants to be in the right place. It wants to be up front. And that's a kind of a backhanded compliment there, or whatever you want to call it, way of looking at it, but it is true. So Porsche 911s, etc., can have snap oversteer problems. I'll let you guys Google all the details on that one. Bottom line is they're a little bit less predictable, more difficult for the average novice driver to try and really control in those 99%, 100% balls out situations. Now, for the most part, that's not going to be a problem for any of us because we're not going to be driving our cars that way. But it does change the way the vehicle feels, the way the vehicle steers, the way it turns into a corner. The front end's lighter. It's going to be a little bit more eager to turn in. The Supra is going to feel a little bit more normal, would for the lack of a better word, more standard, more like a front-engined rear-wheel drive BMW or Mercedes. That's what I mean by that one. Let's see here. What are the true advantages and disadvantages of xDrive, 4MATIC, Quattro, super handling all-wheel drive, Subaru's systems, and on different road conditions and weather? Oh my, this is always a very controversial subject. First off, remember that, and this is not quite in this question, but it's related. The big difference between all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive is marketing. That's really all that there is. So let's get that one out of the way up front. Manufacturers will often market the same system different ways. So for instance, my Dodge Durango is marketed as an all-wheel drive vehicle, whereas the exact same system under the hood of a Jeep Grand Cherokee is marketed as four-wheel drive, but the system is absolutely identical. Two-speed transfer case and all, four-wheel drive in one car, all-wheel drive in the other. So first thing to know, the name doesn't matter. What's more important is how the system operates. Now, xDrive, 4MATIC, and Quattro, these systems all operate very much like a truck-based all-wheel drive system. So if I pull out my handy-dandy note card here, hopefully I don't mark myself like I did last time I tried to wield a pen on this channel. Basically, we have the engine up here, up front in the vehicle. It's a rear-wheel drive vehicle, So the wheels are down here. Now, the engine and transmission are normally sending their power to the rear wheels right like that. There's differential in the back. So to make this all-wheel drive, what they do is they insert a transfer case right here in the middle. It has a chain. The chain moves things over to a gear set, sends power to a front differential, which may be located right around there or so. Now, the transfer case can be either a on-off connection like we find in modern pickup trucks. So if you're looking at a Ram 1500, Silverado, Tundra, Titan, etc., those all-wheel drive, four-wheel drive systems, whatever you want to call them, generally speaking, 4 high versus 2 high, the difference is connected or not connected, 100%. So there's no difference in motion between the rear axle and the front axle. Obviously, you don't want to do that on a firm road surface because you can lose traction. You need these axles to be able to spin at different rates. Now, what most modern all-wheel drive systems like xDrive, 4MATIC, Quattro, etc., the innovation that they have is that they put a clutch pack here, or they put a true center differential, so that way the two axles can spin at different rates. But these systems are all still rear power biased. They can send power to the front when they want, but they can never send more than 50% of the power to the front wheels unless there is wheel slip. So 0 to 100 in the back, 0 to 50% up front, depending on traction situations. Now, xDrive and 4MATIC, marketing terms, functionally these systems are absolutely identical. The big difference in the Quattro all-wheel drive system is where they have located the front differential and that clutch pack right there. Audi has managed to jam everything into the same transmission case. Now, the downside for that in the Audi Quattro vehicles is the position of that transmission. You'll notice that in a BMW or Mercedes system, the front axle is in front of the transmission, generally speaking. It may actually be, depending on the vehicle design, it could be in front of the engine. Doesn't really matter where it's located because there's a separate drive shaft going to it. Quattro, by its very design, that shaft has to be in the transmission case. So it has to be entirely behind the engine. So that means the full engine is in front of the front axle. That's what gives Audi Quattro vehicles, A4, A5, A6, A7, A8, Q5, Q7, Q8, a weight balance that is very similar to a front-wheel drive vehicle, where you can have 55 to 60% of the curb weight on the front axle, but it does not make them front-wheel drive vehicles. This is something that a lot of people confuse with Audi vehicles. Just because the engine is in front of the front axle does not mean that those Audi vehicles are front-wheel drive based. Now, there are a few caveats there because Audi Quattro with Ultra, that one actually chooses to disconnect the rear axle, which is a novelty in this segment, but generally speaking, that series of Quattro is actually a rear bias system. Now, super handling all-wheel drive is very different because the engine's transverse, so that's just like the all-wheel drive system we find in Volvos or Buicks or as the front-wheel drive Cadillacs, Lincolns, etc. It's a front-wheel drive based system with the ability to send more than 50% of the power to the rear axle, so it's a slightly different twist there. Now, it's interesting that you put Subaru all-wheel drive into this equation because Subaru's all-wheel drive system is not terribly unique, actually. It is logically very similar to the systems that we find in those other rear-wheel drive vehicles, with the exception that it disconnects the rear axle. So power is 100% connected to the front axle, even though it's a longitudinal engine design, and then it can send up to 50% of engine power to the rear axle. Now, the important thing to remember with Subaru's all-wheel drive systems is that they're very eco-focused. They're very focused on overall fuel economy. As a result, they're going to default to send power 100% to the front under a wide variety of situations. A lot of folks don't realize that because Subaru's marketing implies that they are the king of all-wheel drive. And while the Subaru all-wheel drive system is very, very accomplished, it's not necessarily the best or the most capable all-wheel drive system out there. For a large number of situations, something like the Rav4 Adventure is going to be more capable, or any vehicle out there that can command a full lock of the center coupling, that's going to be more capable than the Subaru all-wheel drive system. The latest versions of Subaru's system You can never fully lock the center coupling. You can engage X mode, which sends more power to the rear, but from what we've been told by Subaru engineers, it is never a 100% lock of that coupling like we do see in some of the competition. And that's why when you take a look at roller tests or snow tests in some of the Subarus, there's definitely some wheel slip going on before power moves around side to side. We also don't find limited slip differentials or locking differentials in the Subaru systems, so that's going to be a differentiation between something like the Forester and the Jeep Cherokee. The Jeep Cherokee can not only command a complete lock of the center coupling, it can also have a full locking rear differential. It's going to make it much more capable than the Subaru system. But the Subaru system provides excellent traction in adverse weather, and it also provides good fuel economy. So those are the main benefits there. Someone's asking how tall I am, 6 feet tall. In case you're wondering, we generally cover that in the videos. When will we be driving the new Subaru Legacy and Subaru Outback? I don't actually know, but hopefully soon. Subaru has told us that there will probably be a drive event this summer, but we don't know when, and we don't know whether that drive event will be for the Legacy first or for the Outback first. We haven't been told there yet. Let's see here. Cadillac Escalade 2020, hopefully soon. Mercedes-Benz CLA, questions on that one. We haven't driven the CLA in a while here, so we will be doing a full review on the new model. We'll be taking a look at the A-Class first and then following up with the CLA a little bit later. Let's see here. Jake is saying he works for a train company and an airplane a lot when renting a vehicle. What do you recommend to get to rural non-road areas? Expedition, Tahoe, Armada, usual choices, etc. I would say in that group of vehicles, something like the Tahoe or the Expedition, the Armada, they're going to be very, very equal. So you're going to probably want to look at something that has the best ground clearance or something that has a smaller wheelbase. So if you have a choice between something like those and a Jeep Grand Cherokee, the Grand Cherokee is generally going to go more places because of the shorter wheelbase. It's less likely to get stuck as a result. So that would be the big thing to look for right there. Let's move on back up the list here and take a look at some of these other questions here. Used GS350, thoughts on that one? The S350 is going to be pretty reliable, but the GS is also not as speedy as a lot of the competition. So BMW 535, 540, depending on the year that you're looking at, it's definitely going to be faster. A lot of the other options versus the GS350 have also, I think, had better quality interiors. I would say if you're shopping for GS350, also take a good look at the Genesis G80. The G80 has proven just about as reliable as the GS350, but I think it's a better overall value. The overall price tag is going to be a little bit lower. You'll be able to get that 5-liter V8, which is better performance, or the 3.3-liter twin-turbo 6, depending on the year that you're looking at. Let's take a look here. Is the Hyundai Sonata hybrid drivetrain similar to the Ford Explorer hybrid? Yes, it actually is. The Ford Explorer hybrid does not use a planetary power split device like we see in the in the Escape hybrid currently, or from what we hear, the new Escape as well. So what the Explorer hybrid uses is a pancake motor and a traditional 10-speed auto. So we have the engine on one side, we then have a pancake motor and a clutch pack. We then have a typical 10-speed automatic transmission borrowed out of the F-150 trucks. That means that the Explorer hybrid is going to tow, it's going to haul, and it's generally going to feel out on the road like a regular Explorer with a 10-speed. This is probably the same system that we will see in the upcoming F-150 hybrid and F-150 plug-in hybrids whenever those roll out on the scene. There are definitely some advantages and some disadvantages to this style of system. The clutch pack logically will need to get replaced at some point, although it's probably going to have a very long life, probably in excess of 150,000 miles. We don't really know exactly. But the definite advantage to these systems is their durability, especially when towing or hauling those heavier loads. Fuel economy, generally speaking, seems to be a little bit below the planetary hybrid systems because we still have the loss inherent in a standard automatic transmission. You're not escaping that like we do in the Toyota and Ford and FCA and Volt hybrid systems. But overall, the robustness of the system is the big reason that they're doing that. So let's see here. Honda Pilot versus Telluride for long cross-country trips. I would Telluride. I find the seats more comfortable in the Telluride versus the Honda Pilot. It's a little bit newer. That's the big reason for that. The basics of the Pilot have been around for a little bit longer. Used full-size SUV recommendations. I guess it would depend on what you're looking at. I would say depending on your exact needs, it's hard to go wrong with the General Motors series of large SUVs. You're going to be able to find them pretty cheaply because there's so many of them out there. What are our thoughts on the following TRD version of Avalon, Camry, Lexus RCF Track Edition? Honestly, TRD versions of the Avalon and Camry seem a little bit silly to me. RCF Track Edition, that makes a little bit more sense, but the RCF Track Edition just doesn't compensate for the lack of power that we find in the RCF. The RCF price tag versus its power levels, and then comparing that to something like a BMW 440i or a C43, C63 AMG, the power versus performance numbers just aren't there with the RCF. What SUV crossover should we go for when looking for a car in Idaho? Thinking Tucson, RAV4, any other vehicles that you suggest? Again, I think this would depend on your personal priorities. The RAV4 is definitely a hard to go wrong option. The RAV4 has good ground clearance, excellent reliability. The hybrid model is quite appealing. 40 miles per gallon is a pretty significant improvement over the average entry in that segment. Off-road ability and traction ability in the hybrid is going to be different than the regular RAV4. It's definitely going to be a little bit lower, but it is still better than not having an all-wheel drive system at all. I would say, depending on exactly what you're looking at, you should also put the Mazda CX-5 on your shopping list. For those top-end trims, you'll get better performance and a better quality interior. It's also really pretty. And then, of course, the Honda CR-V has excellent fuel economy and performance from its 1.5-liter turbo. Alante is asking, wants to stick with a hybrid SUV. What brand and model do you think is the best? At this exact moment, we don't have too many options for you there. There are a few more coming up here soon. Right now, we're pretty limited to an entry like the RAV4 Hybrid, which is all new for the 2020 model year, or the upcoming Highlander. There's a current generation Highlander Hybrid as well. We will be seeing a hybrid from Ford on the new Explorer. But we don't know exactly when that model is going to go on sale. And then we have some luxury hybrids out there as well, so I'm not sure if you're speaking of those hybrids necessarily. The hard to go wrong with hybrids that are going to be the most reliable overall are going to be the Toyota hybrids. We don't know exactly when we'll see some Honda hybrids in this segment. They've promised them, but we don't really see anything just yet. Hyundai Kia Motor Group has also said that they're going to have a ton of hybrids and plug-in hybrids, but again, we don't see anything specific from there just yet. When are we going to review the Mercedes GLE? Do we think active body control will be worth the cost? That's a tricky question, Jace, because active body control is a truly expensive option. It is pretty cool, but worth the cost? That's tricky. I would generally say no, not worth the cost. But if I was buying a GLE, I would probably buy it because it is super cool. So that's a tricky one. And there are a lot of options that are like that in the luxury segment where new technology, it's hard to say whether it's worth the cost. But if you want the latest gadget, you've got to be willing to pay for it. And that is definitely the newest gadget. Someone says they have a Model 3 sedan, thinking of upgrading to the new hatch. Not sure how they are long-term. Long-term, Mazda does not have the same overall reliability metrics that we find in Honda and Toyota, but then on the flip side, they generally have been more reliable than many of the mainstream brands from America. So depending on the model, the Mazda 3 is probably going to be an okay bet. The new Mazda 3, there's a lot that's changed with it, so it may be less reliable than the norm at Mazda. But I don't think that over the course of 100,000 miles, there's too much to worry about. A lot of the core components are carryover, so the engine and transmission have been used before. Those are the key points of unreliability for most people. How reliable will the new infotainment system be, the interior body panels, that part we just don't know yet. Let's see, our old transmissions in the Mazda CX-9, someone's asking about that. Are they reliable or unreliable? The transmissions that we find in all the modern Mazdas are basically the same. It's an old Ford 4-speed that's then had some extra gears added to it. That's the development route of that transmission, is that old Ford and Mazda 4-speed. That's part of why it's such a physically large transmission. They've had a lot of time to work on that transmission and work some of the kinks out, but is it more reliable than the 2008 to 2011? I would refer you over to some metrics like TrueDelta.com on that. They would have better idea on that. Someone's asking thoughts on a Nissan Murano. The Murano is the softer, cushier cousin in a way to the Edge, the Santa Fe, etc. It definitely focuses on fuel economy and a plush ride, but if you want something that's sportier, you're going to have to look somewhere else. Best used, reliable, fast hybrid car that I can get. You're probably looking at something like a Ford hybrid. That's probably the best there. Let's see here. In the Telluride, if I'm not planning on towing or driving in the snow, is it worth getting all-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive? This is a question we do get a lot. I would say generally all-wheel drive is not necessary for most people out there. Now, there's a lot of talk about whether or not all-wheel drive is necessary in snow country. If you're having this personal debate and you live in town in a well-plowed area, I would argue that front-wheel drive with snow tires would be the best option. So you're going to want to get a really good winter tire, because winter tires are going to help you stop shorter, they're going to help you accelerate better and handle better than all-wheel drive. All-wheel drive is not going to impact your handling or your stopping distance in the snow. It's not going to have that big of an impact there. So remember that if you're debating between all-wheel drive and all-season tires and front-wheel drive with winter tires, I would front-wheel drive with winter tires all the time. Now, the caveat there would be if you're in a rural area or you're in an area that's not well plowed, then you may want all-wheel drive and winter tires. That would get you the ultimate in traction there and ultimate in security. So it really depends on your personal situation. But I do think that a lot of folks out there buy all-wheel drive when they don't necessarily need it. But then again, if you want the all-wheel drive for whatever reason, then that's a personal preference and it's hard to say no to that. But my general recommendation would be that front-wheel drive is just fine for a lot of folks out there. They're going to end up saving money in the long run on the fuel economy, as well as wear and tear on the overall system. Opinion CX-5 GT versus Forester Limited. I would CX-5 every day. I think the Forester is a really great value in base trims, but by the time you work your way on up to the top trims, the interior tends to feel a little bit less premium than the other options, a little bit cheaper than the other options in the segment, especially versus the CX-5. And we don't have the same kind of power that we find in the CX-5 Turbo. So if you're looking at those top-end trims of the CX-5, you'll get their 2.5-liter turbo engine. It's one of the most powerful engines in the segment. The key thing to remember about the Forester is it is a little bit less expensive than many of the alternatives in its base model, and it has standard all-wheel drive, and there's no free lunch. So that standard all-wheel drive has to come from somewhere, and oftentimes with Subaru vehicles, that somewhere is less expensive interior trappings, a little bit less sound deadening, etc. We definitely see that in the Forester. It's an excellent value in mid and low-end trims because we get that all-wheel drive standard, we get those base features standard, etc. But by the time you've worked your way up to the top, it's definitely outclassed by some of the more premium options in this segment. Subaru Ascent's 2.4-liter engine reliable. I haven't heard any specific problems, but I think it's a little too early to really tell. The Ascent hasn't been out that long. So I would say if you're really worried about reliability, wait at least another year. And then check in with some of the short-term reliability metrics, like JD Power or perhaps True Delta, and then see what it's been doing. What are we expecting from the 2024 runner? At this point, not too much. Which minivan would we choose, the 2019 Odyssey or the 2019 Pacifica? I would definitely choose the Pacifica, Amy. And specifically, I would choose the Pacifica Hybrid. The main reason for that is it's a no-compromises hybrid. Pardon me. The Pacifica Hybrid is a little bit more expensive in terms of MSRP than the regular Pacifica, but remember that it qualifies for the full $7,500 federal tax credit, and it also qualifies for state incentives that could reach as high as $5,000. So for instance, if you live in the state of Colorado, you'd get $7,500 back from the feds, $5,000 back from Colorado, and you would have fuel economy that's 50% better than any other minivan in America. At this point in time, with fuel costs rising in America, the hybrid model, I think, is really interesting. We've actually been driving it this week, and we've been averaging about 32 miles per gallon when driven as a hybrid, and easily 30 miles of electric range. Now, if you choose never to plug in your hybrid, you don't have to. It will drive just fine, getting you 30 miles per gallon, 10 mile per gallon bump over the Odyssey or the regular Pacifica. And you can escape the 9-speed automatic transmission that a lot of folks dislike. That transmission is the same in the Pacifica and the Odyssey. So if you're looking at most trims of the Odyssey, every trim of the Pacifica non-hybrid, same 9-speed automatic transmission in those vehicles. And finally, in addition to the fuel economy there, remember that the Pacifica Hybrid is not going to need as frequent of oil changes. Your brakes are going to last a lot longer because of the hybrid system as well. And finally, if you dislike visiting the gas station, remember that a tank of gas is going to last you a long, long time, depending on how often you can actually charge. So if you're able to charge at home and at work, for instance, like I can, I have a 30-mile one-way commute, so I can charge at home, drive 30 miles mainly on electricity, drive back home 30 miles mainly on electricity. The tank of gas in the Pacifica should last me about 2,500 miles. This is basically the same story that we see out of Chevy Volt owners. So definitely keep that in mind when it comes to the minivans. The only real downside to the Pacifica Hybrid is that it does not seat 8. It only seats 7. That's because of the battery packs. When will we get a new Genesis Coupe? We've been told basically the 12th of never on that one. So Hyundai is not going to be getting a rear-wheel drive Genesis Coupe from them on that side. And then the Hyundai Genesis, the Genesis division of Hyundai has said that they're going to be focusing on crossovers and completing their lineup before they delve into more performance-oriented vehicles like coupes. So it's definitely going to be a while there. Let's see, Naveen asked if 10 speeds were overkill. What I meant was, do we really need 10 speeds? Is there such a thing as too many gears? So far, I would say that the 10-speed automatic transmissions that we've seen so far are not overkill. So it is possible that there is going to be a transmission that has too many gears and it's useless. But specifically speaking about the two 10-speed automatic transmissions that are available now, the GM and Ford 10-speed and then the Honda 10-speed, I think that they're actually well suited to their applications. The Honda 10-speed that we find in the top-end trims of the Odyssey, as well as the Acura RDX, that has a really large ratio spread. So the purpose of that 10-speed is to give you a very low first gear and a very high 10th gear. That helps improve highway fuel economy and it helps improve 0 to 60 acceleration. The difference is pretty marked, especially when we take a look at those vehicles versus similar power outputs in their older 6-speed automatics. Now, the Ford and GM 10-speed automatic transmission is going after something different. It's going after closely spaced ratios. Closely spaced ratios help out when it comes to towing, especially towing with a diesel engine. So in truck applications, those definitely have a benefit. And then in performance applications like Camaro and Mustang, it allows you to have a more consistent RPM window for acceleration. So you can keep your engine in its optimum power band a little bit longer as you're accelerating. The deal here would be the moment we have too many gears and shifting between them actually starts reducing your overall performance, or the overall weight of the transmission becomes a disadvantage for fuel economy, then it would be a big deal. But I think at the moment 10 speeds are okay in what we've seen them used in. We should also see these very similar advantages for the Ford and GM 10-speed automatic transmission when it comes to the new HD pickup trucks from Ford and GM. They are both using a modified version of the co-designed 10-speed automatic. So Ford and GM co-designed the 10-speed. Each manufacturer then independently upgraded that transmission and then redesigned it for their heavy-duty trucks. General Motors licensed the Allison name and stapled that to their transmission. It is the same 10-speed automatic transmission. I've spoken with a ton of GM engineers on this one. It is the same 10-speed automatic basic design, upgraded for the heavy-duty truck line, and then they licensed the Allison name. It is not a true Allison transmission on that front. I don't think that's a particular problem, actually, because Allison would have had to have reinvented the wheel, and why bother when we already had a working 10-speed design? Let's see here. Any thoughts on a potential upcoming Fit Hybrid? I will believe it when I see it. That's my thought there. You've mentioned putting a deposit on Rivian. Seems like a solid company, but do you have concerns about its ability to deliver, Peter? Yes, Peter, I kind of do, but we'll see. The vehicles are getting pretty close to their final production, and as you see, there's definitely some investment coming in there from various angles into the company. I think that financially they're a little bit more stable really than Tesla at the moment, but admittedly they haven't delivered anything. So I would say it's probably 80-20%. 80% that they'll deliver something, maybe 20% that they won't. We'll know a little bit more as we get into mid-2020. Let's see here. I thought mid-engine versus rear engine was where the engine sat in comparison to the rear axle. It depends on who you talk to, I would say, on that one, and what the manufacturer is really trying to say. Some manufacturers have a rear engine, a quote-unquote rear engine label on vehicles where the engine is in front of the rear axle but behind everything else in the vehicle. So there we go. Let's see here, moving along here. Lease on the MDX is ending soon. Should I X5 or GLE? That's a pretty tough call, actually. I like a lot of aspects about both of them. I would say that my personal preference would be for the X5 at the moment. I think it's a slightly better value than the GLE, but the GLE is definitely really pretty on the inside. What's going on with Chrysler Pacifica all-wheel drive, a hybrid model, or an all-wheel drive hybrid? We don't know yet, and that's really a good question. FCA has quasi said that there may be a Pacifica all-wheel drive coming up at some point, likely with the hybrid system, but we haven't seen any test mules out there. We haven't seen anything of that sort. So I'm going to go ahead and guess that FCA is spending their money somewhere else, and we may not see a hybrid until the Pacifica gets a refresh at the very least. Shamil is asking thoughts on car names versus alphanumeric designations. I really don't care about car names or numbers. I don't understand why Lincoln went through this massive soul-searching thing where we had to ditch all the names and then go to letters and then ditch the letters and go back to names. I just think it's confusing. Just pick one and stick with it. That's all I care about. Changing it a lot is what I find to be a problem. Let's see here. Thoughts on the new Corvette? I think I will hold my thoughts until we actually see it in person. Someone's asking here if we'll be reviewing Porsche crossovers. Porsche's kind of a tricky company to deal with on my end of things, so I don't know if we will anytime soon or not. I really would love to get my hands on a Macan and a Cayenne. We just don't have any real good feedback from Porsche on if that's possible. They generally don't lend their cars to very many outlets. Some of their PR people have been a little bit difficult to deal with, so I'm not sure if and when that will happen. Moving along here, do you know if the 2020 Highlander hybrid will be four-wheel drive? Again, talking about the differences between four-wheel drive and all-wheel drive, it's a marketing term, but the Highlander hybrid will have an electric rear axle. We do know that, so it's going to be basically the same hybrid system that we see now with a downsized engine from a V6 down to a four-cylinder engine. That's going to be the big change. Starting price of the base hybrid, I would assume, I'm going out on a limb here, but I would assume that it's actually going to be a little bit lower than the current generation Highlander hybrid. And if it's not, then the delta between the Highlander and the Highlander hybrid is going to be narrower. Basically the same thing that we saw with the new current generation RAV4 and the RAV4 hybrid. Toyota needs to really move a lot more hybrids in their lineup in order to meet CAFE and CARB scores and regulations here in California and federally. So the big method of doing that is to push more hybrids out on the road. And so Toyota's scheme for that is to narrow the delta between those two in terms of pricing. Let's see here. If you didn't like a car after you owned it for 1 year, would you get a new car? Ooh, that's a tricky question, David. If you really, really didn't like it, I might be convinced to do that. I mean, it is a really bad financial decision, I would say that, because you're losing most of your depreciation over the lifetime of the car. The biggest chunk is going to happen right in that first year. So that is kind of a bummer. But if you really hate it and it's going to affect your quality of life or your stress levels, then maybe it's worth getting rid of. Ramblin' Ram is asking, any advice for someone wanting to become an automotive journalist? The usual advice I think applies there. You try and get a job with an outlet that already exists. That's going to be the big thing, and then see how you can move on from there. The vast majority of us in the industry, that's how we all started. Let's see here. If Chevy had BMW build their Corvette, wouldn't there be more outrage in the press than the Tesla because people love to talk? I don't know. I know this is going to sound weird, but I don't have a problem with the Supra at all, Blake. BMW makes lovely cars. Toyota actually makes good rear-wheel drive vehicles as well. There are definitely some reasons that you might want to get a Lexus over a BMW, for instance. I mean, the Toyota brand specifically in America doesn't make rear-wheel drive cars, but the Lexus division of Toyota does, and they're all very, very in-house developed there, shall I say. If you have a Lexus IS and a BMW 3 Series out on a track, the IS definitely feels more nimble in the corners. It understeers a little bit less. you really will notice the difference between the two vehicles. Now, unfortunately, you'll also notice that the Lexus is going to be considerably slower. That's always been the downside with the last generation of Lexus IS, actually, and the generation before it as well. The Lexuses have great on-road feel. The Toyota and Lexus engineers really have a strong dedication to steering feel, steering precision, especially the front suspension dynamics, but awfully slow. And this is really where the BMW connection comes in, so you can get the best of both worlds. Toyota has tuned the front suspension, so I haven't been able to drive them back to back, but the Supra definitely feels lighter than I remember the BMW feeling, a little bit more eager to turn in. Hopefully we'll be able to drive them back to back soon. Toyota says that they were responsible for all of the front suspension tuning in the vehicle, as well as its understeer, oversteer dynamics as well. They were able to narrow those in different than the Z4 and the Supra. So I don't necessarily see a potential a theoretical, hypothetical BMW Corvette tie-up being any different, because you could leverage the best aspects of both brands as long as it's done right. And there are many ways to do this. You could simply buy a BMW and stick your own logo on it, or you could be involved in the development stage from the very beginning. And this takes different flavors. So we have the MX-5 and the Fiat 124, for instance. The MX-5 was much further along in its development cycle. Fiat posthumously reimbursed Mazda for the development expenses on that vehicle. So they weren't directly involved in the chassis design and the direction of the vehicle from the very beginning. So that's quite different. You could do it like Nissan and Mercedes did with the QX30 and the Mercedes-Benz GLA, for instance, where the GLA had been designed and then Infiniti had access to the parts bin, but is not building it in a Mercedes factory. In fact, the Mercedes engine is being built in a Nissan factory, and the whole car is being built in a Nissan factory. So that's a different flavor of these things. And then we have the Supra Z4 tie-up, which is stranger yet. It was co-developed from the very beginning by Toyota and BMW. Their engineers worked together to create the thought process behind the vehicle, define the vehicle's dimensions, define the operating characteristics. Then the chassis was designed based on other BMW platforms, shrinking it and poking it and prodding it to make it function. And then once these general parameters were established, the two manufacturers separated, and then Toyota crafted the interior from the BMW parts bin because it was the easiest way to do it. And then it's actually manufactured by Magnasteer in Austria. So it's technically not manufactured by BMW, even though that factory does build the BMW Z4 as well. It also builds the Jaguar I-Pace and a bunch of other different vehicles. So it's a really bizarre setup there. But I don't particularly find that arrangement offensive, especially if it allows us to have more variation. The Z4 and the Supra were unlikely to ever resurrect without this tie-up. So if it's the choice of having them and having them related and then not having them at all, I'd rather take the variation and the unique cars that we get to have because of these tie-ups rather than not having them at all. And I'm actually okay with deeper collaborations in the future. So if other manufacturers want to create performance vehicles together, I think that's just fine. Remember that Camaro and Mustang share a 10-speed automatic transmission, so there's actually some DNA that's common between those two vehicles as well. Moving along here, what do we think about the 2019 Explorer Xt or Xlt? Do you think a used one will be a good deal in the next year or so? It probably will. Generally speaking, when a new model comes out, the previous generation product will depreciate a little bit faster because folks want that newer model. Let's see here. Do we think the Hyundai Accent will get new safety features in its upcoming redesign? It probably will. It'll probably be substantially similar to the Kia Rio, where the base model is not going to have some of those newer features, but then upper level trims or maybe mid-level trims will have at least pedestrian detection and autonomous braking. Would you recommend plug-in hybrid or electric cars for those relying on public charging only? Generally speaking, no, especially not on the electric car front. On the plug-in hybrid front, I would say it depends. If you're looking at a very mild plug-in hybrid that has a relatively small battery pack, then it may not make a huge difference. If you can pick up a few electrons here and there, and then it operates as a regular hybrid, it's going to be just fine. Especially on some of the hybrids where the battery pack does not make much of an impact on interior space. So for instance, the Volvo plug-in hybrids, a lot of the BMW plug-in hybrids, the upcoming Ford Escape hybrid, plug-in hybrid, also looks to be a good option there. And if you think that you'll be able to have a charging station at some point later, or if your employer provides EV charging, then it's not going to be too bad of an idea. Let's moving on here. Did we hit that truck that cut us off in the Armada video? No, we did not. We definitely jammed on the brakes pretty quickly there, and that was all just fine. It was actually a little further away than it looked in the video. In the video, it looked pretty sketchy. It wasn't quite that bad because of the way cameras make things look there. Does the 2020 Explorer still have more space than the 2020 Highlander? Trenton's asking. We will know very soon. The Explorer has always been very well packaged. I would be surprised if its packaging changes too much, but then the rear-wheel drive layout could affect that, so we'll see here. Let's see here. What are our thoughts on the new Sonata for 2020? I think it looks great. I will wait to see how it drives, but I do like the thought process behind that car. Trying to struggle along here because we are narrowing down to our episode end here. I promised everybody we would only be an hour. Let's see here. Is the Kia Telluride the most roomy crossover? It's not a minivan. That is definitely true. So the Telluride has an enormous amount of interior legroom. It also has a pretty big cargo room. So yes, it is definitely one of the largest. The Hyundai Palisade is right in there too because the two are very closely related. Hopefully I'll be able to cover all of you people as we rush on through these questions. You feel the new Mazda built Yaris won't be as reliable as the Toyota built ones? Probably. We have definitely seen that in the current generation Yaris. The Yaris IA doesn't appear to be quite as reliable as the Toyotas. The Delta hasn't been huge, however. Moving along here. Venza or BMW X3, which is better? That's a pretty big question. I would definitely go for X3. That's what I would pick there. Significant differences between 2018 and 2019 Clarity. No significant differeces there. The Clarity, Honda generally doesn't insert too many changes until the vehicle gets redesigned. Let's see here. Which RAV4 revision is good? Is it best? I don't quite understand that question there. When will we see the Bronco and Bronco 2? Not quite sure on that one. Is Tesla going bankrupt? Doesn't look like it because they've been really good at getting other people's money. So I would say don't bet against Tesla. Their financial situation definitely is questionable, but they have said that they're going to be raising some extra cash. So as long as they raise enough cash, it's probably okay there. When do we anticipate next-gen MDX and QX60 to be announced? I'm going to say it's probably not in the next 12 months. So we haven't really seen any spy shots for those. If we had seen spy shots, then it would probably be a little closer. Torn between 2020 Outback versus 2019 Accord. That's a pretty big difference there. I mean, the Outback is definitely more crossover-like, higher ground clearance. Handling is not going to be as good, but it's going to be very comfortable. So depends on what you're looking at for there. Does Aisin make a 10-speed for Lexus? Yes, they do. So the Aisin 10-speed is only found in that Lexus model at the moment. I actually forgot about that when we were talking about 10-speed automatics. Hopefully we'll see that in other Toyota and Lexus vehicles coming up soon. Let's see, Pilot Touring and Elite models with the 9-speed. Any thoughts on the transmission? I have a video on that one. I would encourage you to go check that out. Transmission has not substantively changed. So there were some software updates for 2019 and supposedly a very slight hardware tweak hasn't affected the way that transmission actually shifts. So if you're concerned about that at all, you dislike the way it shifts, I would skip that and get something different. Let's see here. Do you think you'll get a Nissan Maxima all-wheel drive if Altima, blah, blah, blah? We haven't heard anything about a Maxima all-wheel drive. They just refreshed the Maxima, so it's probably going to be another 2 years or so before we see anything about a next-generation model. Do we like the Ford Fusion? I do like the way the Ford Fusion looks, but it is getting a little bit older than a lot of the other options at the moment. Let's see here. Can we talk about how we get cars to view? Do you call someone in a manufacturer? Do we go pick one up, etc.? So the way that most of this is handled is that we do talk to the car company. So we reach out and we say, Toyota, we'd like to review this, this, and this. Ford, we'd like to review these things, etc. And then the cars are the actual arrangement of how cars happen is handled by a third-party fleet management company. There's a separate company that actually make sure that all the cars are taken care of, tires rotated, oil changed, all that kind of stuff. And those are the companies who we get the cars from. Sometimes they're picked up, sometimes we pick them up. It just depends on exactly how that's going. So our interactions with dealers are very limited because we never interact with the dealers. We deal just with the manufacturers and the cars from their fleet. Moving right along here. Let's see. Telluride, yay or nay? I do like the Telluride, Tim. The only thing that I would say is if you're looking for a very child seat friendly vehicle, the Telluride and the Palisade are not going to be as friendly as the Volkswagen Atlas. You know how manuals keep getting worse fuel economy than autos. However, you look at the gear ratios in both transmissions, top gear and manual ratio is different. That is true, but everything being equal, the manual transmissions, generally speaking, would still get lower fuel economy than continuously variable transmissions or the latest in modern multi-speed automatic transmissions, especially something like the ZF 9-speed automatic transmission because the ratio spread is so large. Let's see here. Is hydrogen going to gain popularity in the near future or fail? We really don't know. We'll see how that goes. I do know that it is being pushed very, very heavily in Japan and South Korea. So those are the big things that that you should know about there. So in the U.S., California is really where the push is happening. We don't really see that same push in other states. I would say in the U.S., unless more states hop on the bandwagon, then there definitely will be a problem with adoption on hydrogen. This may turn out to be just a California, Japan, South Korea test tube thing, and we'll see how it goes. I would say we won't really know for at least another 10 years or so. Why can't you get adaptive cruise control in the 2019 GM trucks? That is a very good question, and GM does not have a very good answer, to be perfectly frank. Is the junk behind you, does it mean anything? It is random junk. That does not mean anything specifically. Any issue buying a 2019 Volt since it's been discontinued by GM? I would say no. The Volt's been pretty reliable overall, so I don't think any problems for that. Skylar is asking, why is the Tesla for sale? The Tesla is for sale because we need to get rid of it so we can buy the Rav4 Hybrid. So we ordered the Rav4 Hybrid. We ordered the Tesla Model 3 just for the video series here to do the full review on the standard range, test its range, do all those good things, find out what was in it. And that's why we have to get rid of it now. We don't really have room at the end for it. I know a lot of questions have been raised about this one, but the big reason that we're not keeping it is that it's not a crossover. So if the Model 3 standard range had been a Model Y standard range for $35,000, we probably would have kept it. But as it is, the Model 3 just doesn't fit into what we need here. The Soul EV's lease is not up. We have a Dodge Durango. I have a Grand Cherokee. We have 2 to 3 cars swirling around here. The last thing I need is another car hanging out. And then, of course, we have the Rav4 Hybrid coming, so there's another reason that it's got to go. So again, if you're interested in that, let us know. You can send us a note somehow. Go over to facebook.com and send us a note over there. We'll probably be selling it for, I don't know, around $38,000 or so. It is a Model 3 Standard Range Plus with autopilot on it. So that's the key thing to know in blue. So list price for that model right now would be $40,000 something plus destination, so about $41,000 or so. So we'll probably be listing it for $38,000. We haven't made official decisions on that just yet. But again, if you are interested, go over to facebook.com/AlexNautos, drop us a note there, make us an offer. Maybe we'll sign it somewhere for you. And then our very last question of the day is going to be, what do we think of FCA as a company? Because this is an interesting one, and one that I can pontificate about for a while. I would say FCA, for some reason, in a lot of circles, has a lot of negative press that I don't understand. FCA is a quirky little company. Fiat has definitely been stinking up the room in their sales in the US and in Europe both. But a lot of core FCA models are doing really, really well. So Durango, Grand Cherokee, Charger, Challenger, etc., really selling quite well. Challenger's best sales year is last year ever. The Challenger is ancient, and last year they beat the first year it was available in America. Fathom that. FCA really does batshit crazy really well. They will jam a big, powerful engine in anything, and all of a sudden it's fantastic. not fantastic in every way, just fantastically crazy. That's what I mean by that. So will a Challenger handle like an M6 or an M5? Absolutely not. Is it as well put together as a number of other things we could talk about? Definitely not. But the drivetrain is absolutely solid. High horsepower, a ZF 8-speed automatic transmission. They're just fun to drive, and they're crazy. So that's why they sell well. And FCA, as a result, is very, very profitable. So for some reason, folks have equated some of the sales troubles at FCA, especially the Fiat division, or at the Chrysler division, or with certain Dodge models like the really ancient Dodge Journey, which is terrible. They've equated those particular problems with overall problems at FCA. And they've also equated some of the drama that we've seen inside FCA's management about shopping for an acquisition or a merger or whatever in that realm. But the reality is that FCA is very, very profitable. They've paid off almost all of their long-term debt. FCA is actually in one of the best financial conditions of any of the modern auto manufacturers. The downside to that is that by paying off all that debt and putting them in a good financial situation, they have abandoned some of the product freshening that folks out there in the industry think that they should be doing. Now, clearly that hasn't hurt Challenger sales, because why spend money redesigning the Challenger when you're having your best sales year ever? Go figure. But a lot of us would like to see a new Challenger, a new lighter, more nimble Challenger. A lot of us would like to see an all-wheel drive minivan or a three-row crossover from the Chrysler brand or a new Durango or whatever it is that you want FCA to create. But I wouldn't bet against them. They're definitely firing on all cylinders, and the primary reason that FCA has been looking for a tie-up is to reduce costs even further, help move those synergies to a different level. And they're on a good financial footing, generally speaking, to try and either make that happen or live without it. So who knows what exactly we will see from FCA in the future. But again, I wouldn't bet against them. With all that out of the way, thanks for taking the time to watch us, and we will sign out here. If you want to find us on a next live stream, we should be live streaming, looking at the calendar here, next Friday. So not this Friday, but next Friday, we should be having a live stream back at our usual time of 4 p.m. Pacific time. I'll see you next week.